Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zach and today I am driving a 1964 Chrysler New Yorker. Up front is a 7.2 liter V8 and down below is a 3-speed automatic transmission. Now I'm super excited to be driving this New Yorker for two reasons. First of all, I actually recently drove a 1989 Chrysler New Yorker and I thought that vehicle was pretty large, but this puts that vehicle to shame. Second reason is the fact that this is a 1964 and I haven't driven a whole ton of vehicles from the 60s, probably a handful or two. And so I'm always excited to broaden my horizons when it comes to automotive history. But if you would like to share your piece of automotive history with me, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. I come out to you and I'll film your vehicle just like I'm filming this New Yorker today. But let's get back to that 7.2 liter V8 under the hood. Well, that is not the factory engine that came in the New Yorker. It actually came with a 6.8 liter, known as the 413 cubic inch V8. Now, although the 440 in this car wasn't offered in 1964, it was actually offered the next year in 1965. This particular engine was pulled out of a motorhome from either the late 60s or early 70s, so it's what you would have seen from Chrysler back in that era. Horsepower, you could chuck a wiffle ball down a hallway and you might land on the power number. Who knows? It's around 300 to 400 horsepower. And this engine is outfitted with a quad jet carb, giving it a nice little extra bump. All right, let's go. It's not fast. It's decently quick. It's very torquey. And it sounds like the old 98 Ram that I used to own that had a 5.9 Magnum V8. This is also technically a Magnum engine, which is cool to see. But I went over a few bumps and it just soaked it up. And we'll talk about that with the driving feel, but this is just such an interesting and fun drive. Now, like I said, paired to it is a 3-speed automatic, and it's actually doing a pretty decent job. It doesn't love shifting when it's cold, but when it warms up, it's actually doing a pretty decent job, and I'm pretty happy with it. However, it is shifted in a very odd way, and we'll talk about that later on. Last but not least, of course, the Chrysler New Yorker is rear-wheel drive. So how's it feel to actually drive the New Yorker? Well, it's very floaty and very boaty. If you have anywhere to go fast, this isn't really the car for you. But if you want to go somewhere in style, there aren't many better options. This is a low and slow automobile, but this was one of the most expensive Chryslers you could buy back in the day, particularly this specific trim level added on top of that. So this was a luxury vehicle back in the day. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior because we have quite a bit to talk about. Well, in front of me, I have a bunch of gauges, knobs, dials, and lights. Working from the left to the right, we have our temperature and fuel gauge, as well as our headlights and wipers. Then in the center, we get the speedometer, very classic, very classy. And off to the right, we have the alternator, a clock, oil light, and our cigarette lighter. The steering wheel is an adjustable steering wheel, which was pretty high tech for 1964, but you get these wires that operate the horn. I love that. I love the horn in this thing, and it's actually really loud. But off to the left, this is where you'll find the shifter. So this is a 1960s push button shifter. And I haven't driven a vehicle with this setup before. So off to the left is this little handle. You move that all the way down for park and all the way up for neutral. Once you move it up, then you can hit the buttons off to the right to select your gear. There's reverse, neutral, drive, second, and first gear. Off to the left of that shifter, we do have a little switch for the power antenna. Moving on to the door, we do have our latch to get in and out. Looks very, very interesting. And then down below, we do have our power window switches. Very, very neat. Up on the dash, I do have these really interesting vents that you pull up in order to have them either defrost the windshield or blow right at you. Now, the left vent, after almost 60 years, doesn't want to stay up anymore, but the right vent does, and that's what you're seeing now. Moving into the center, we do have our heating and air conditioning options. Now, this car has a very interesting air conditioning setup. First of all, these are the controls. They look almost identical to the shifter, which is kind of funny to me, but this car actually came from the factory with 2 air conditioning units, one for up front, one for out back behind the second row of seats. Very, very weird, because back in the day when air conditioning first came out, it was a completely separate system, not integrated into the vehicles, and so it was actually somewhat common in the 40s and 50s to have air conditioning units in the back but not in the front. So Chrysler offered it in the back but said, hey, we'll also put it up front, and thus you have 2 separate air conditioning units. This grate here, this is actually your speaker, and powering that speaker is what you'll find down below, which is the AM and FM radio, which still works. To the left of that, we have our key, our floor air control, and our autopilot. So you can set this car's cruise control through this little knob, and they actually named it autopilot. That's what it says underneath the dash, which is kind of funny. In 1964, nearly 60 years later, autopilot is still in the current lexicon, just in a very different way, but from another American manufacturer. Down below that, I actually do have an adjustment for the rear speaker. You can kind of play with almost the balance and fader back here in 1964, which was a big deal. And off to the right, I do have my door locks. Then we do have a little pull-out ashtray, and we have a pretty open center area. Of course, we do have the transmission tunnel, but I don't get any factory cup holders. No car this age does. So unfortunately, the Chrysler New Yorker from 1964 fails the big friggin' bottle test. We do get a center console, however, and we can flip it up to reveal a bench seat. The seats are very comfortable. This is the era where they operated pretty much as part of the suspension. They're very bouncy, they're very cushy, and I'm very, very pleasantly enjoying myself. The driver's seat is power, and the passenger seat is not power, but you can recline it if you would like. So very, very cool to see. But speaking of seats, we do have back seats. So let's go do a back seat review. All right, so we're in the back of the 1964 Chrysler New Yorker, and first of all, the seats are really comfy. My knees are not hitting the seat in front of me. My head's not hitting the ceiling, even with my Walmart sunglasses on my head. I do have an ashtray over here and the same funky handle to get in and out. However, this window, after almost 60 years, doesn't really want to roll down, but I will show the passenger side. There is no B-pillar on the side of the car, meaning no pole in between the front and rear doors. So when the windows are down, you get a completely open experience. This is pretty much gone from automotive design because of structural integrity for roofs if the car rolled over. I can't imagine how safe this car was, but that was part of the beauty of the 60s, is that we weren't thinking about crashes. We weren't thinking about what would happen if you rolled over. We were just smiling and happy. Yes, modern cars are a lot safer now, and I'm very thankful for that, but there is a little bit of style that has been lost. I do have a little center console back here. It's a giant cushy foam brick, and like I said, there was from the factory a separate AC system back here. Now unfortunately it has since been removed from this car, but very, very cool to see that shelf. Let's hop out, we'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. All right, so we're on the back of the Chrysler New Yorker, and I'm not actually this short. I'm just standing on an incline. I'm not that short. Anyway, so we do have 2 separate keys for the ignition and the trunk, and Chrysler at the time was still only doing one-sided keys. There we go. And open it up. This trunk is beyond massive. I don't even know if Webster's Dictionary has come up with a word to describe how big this rear trunk is. I could easily sit in here. And someone commented one time, they're like, why don't you sit in giant trunks? Well, I don't want to mess it up and get my dirty shoes in there. But I assure you, a family of 4 could probably sleep back here in a pinch. Or, you know what? I know friends with dorm rooms that have been smaller than this. They'd probably actually enjoy this luxury upgrade of a living space in terms of this trunk. Something I do want to note, however, Chrysler New Yorker says it across there, but that is your fuel filler cap. It is actually hidden in the center down below. And you can still access it without opening the trunk. I just remembered it while the trunk was open, but you can still pop that out when the trunk is closed. So that is the rear cargo space of the 1964 Chrysler New Yorker. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and I love the look of the Chrysler New Yorker because it is so regal and so different than any of the other cars that I drive here on the channel. You guys are used to seeing, of course, modern cars, 2000s cars, 90s cars, the occasional 80s, maybe the occasional 70s car. But just looking at this car, how brash this design really was, is so cool to me. In the 1960s, we looked up to the skies, we looked up to the stars, and by the end of the decade, we got there. But it's reflected in the design of the cars at the time. This looks like a jetliner. Come back inside for a second. These dials and switches remind me of an older jet airplane. The exterior, the fins, the shapes, the curves, the angles look like this thing might take flight off of the newly discovered jet engine. And to its credit, Chrysler did experiment with a jet-powered car. It's just so regal and different, and I love that about the New Yorker. And that bleeds into my final thoughts. What do I think driving a 1964 Chrysler New Yorker? Well, I don't have anything bad to say about this car. And how could you? It's lasted 60 years. If I was gonna sit here and bash this thing for being too slow or squeaking, I don't really deserve my place here on YouTube. What this car to me is a mood. It's a feeling. It's a way of life. The 1960s were bright and sunny and cheery. Specifically, 1964 was a landmark year. An important step was taken in the civil rights movement, putting a law into place for equality of races. The music was amazing. The Beach Boys, fun, fun, fun. Pretty Woman, and a personal favorite, My Girl. Just listening to the music of the era, you could tell it was a happy, bubbly time. And getting back to it, like I talked about in my 67 Belvedere review, which if you go to watch that, I apologize if I'm repeating ideas, but we looked to the stars. The space race was going on. Our best and brightest were figuring out how to go to the moon. Jetliners were becoming more and more common. Personal travel by airplane was realistic. You could smoke a long cigarette thousands of feet up in the air traveling across the country. It was a time of excitement and change. And sure, no decade is without sin, and there were awful parts of the 1960s that I hope we never revisit. Our president was assassinated the year before this car was built. But that's the beauty of nostalgia. That's the gift that I have. I get to remember the good parts without the burden of the bad parts. The Chrysler New Yorker from 1964 helps me remember all of the good parts of life and block out the bad. From where I'm sitting, all I can see is sunshine, blue skies, and the hum of a big block V8. From where I'm sitting, life is good. Life is very, very good. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to John for letting me take out his New Yorker. I was so excited to film this car. Such a cool piece of our history, of American history. John has been absolutely awesome to work with. Very, very knowledgeable about these vehicles as well. So he is a fantastic asset to the channel. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.